John, you're up first.
Yeah, I was talking to Lee last week, um, and we spoke of a number of projects that Lee's working on. But one of the ones that was interesting that came up was the fact that he's keen to have a customer database for Service Desk. And rather than, I mean, we discussed the various options of whether to like hold off or to go ahead and build this. But one of the things that came up was that this sounds an awful lot like a work item. Like it's got custom fields, as in like the customer has a billing rate. They have a name. They're not a user in the traditional sense, as in that he specifically doesn't want to give them a email address or to have them log on to his instance or anything like that. He just wants a billing entity. On the other hand, they're not really quote unquote work items because there's no work to be done on a customer. They're never finished. So yeah, I thought it was interesting and it kind of informs what we would do next with this idea of a customer portal. So I'm kind of interested in everyone's thoughts on it.
I can go first. I would just say I think that it is similar to a work item. I think we should be careful not to treat everything like a hammer though. Doesn't mean it's not a good idea. I personally want something like a customer and we propose an organization and then with the contacts basically. Because I want to figure out how to use GitLab as a CRM so we don't have to paste in like Salesforce links when a customer is interested in a feature. And we actually roll all that data up in GitLab itself. I think that's important. And like at the end of the day, we're building a collection of objects with defined relationships where each object has different attributes, right? How we end up building that is implementation details that I would lean on engineers to drive. I don't think it's a bad idea, and it has lots of use cases far beyond just Service Desk, I think. But that's my 2 cents.
So to be clear, are you in favor of having customers as a standalone first-class object, if you like, or as a work item?
I think customers will have relationships to work items, but I don't know if they would ever have, like, you wouldn't put a customer necessarily through a workflow. But what this does open up the ability to do is use work items as a way to like track opportunities, right? Like in Salesforce, the way it works is you have a organization, then you have contacts, but then you have these like opportunities, which are more temporal type things. And this is what you could use it for, is like if a customer has a request, that's like a work item. So I'm in favor of making a first class thing, but if there's a way to make a generic, I also pitched in that same example of like, can we create a custom, basically like data objects? And I pointed to how Zendesk has their custom objects API and use that to power this. So that way, like we have a generic thing that also works for custom fields on work items as well. Oh, let me link to that too. It's really interesting. Zendesk. Because this is basically what every customer will want at some point or some form or fashion, is this sort of generic. This is what customers really want in the long run.
I'm basically saying the same thing, but similar, like the MRs, that's another one we have to think about. Can they get the same properties as work items? Is there an easy way to scale it so that that flexibility exists on other objects as well as work items?
Do you mean that
like
merge requests
rhetorical.
wouldn't be a work item themselves, but they would be able to share some of the widgets that work items use?
Well, we have to, I'm not sure if you all are talking to that team yet. It would be ideal if they were work items. I don't get the impression that they would be able to do that, but maybe they could. But there may be objects like that where we can like tack on the same functionality to augment an existing object.
Yeah, it feels like a little bit like Conway's law that the only thing that wouldn't be a work item that's in your workflow would be an MR, but simply because it belongs to a different team. You know, it's like doesn't really make sense to me.
I know we're calling them work items. I feel like if you look at Notion and all the other things, like it's gonna be just tables or columns or really generic things at some point that everyone can just build data off of that makes sense to them.
John, do you think MRs and like a task are the same thing though? Like how might we kind of diverge them, I guess? Like is one of them more actions versus like collaboration, or what do y'all think?
I think
I
that's
guess,
definitely
like,
one for Gabe.
go ahead.
I see them as collaboration, really, because really a merge request, the only thing it's doing is facilitating the merging of one branch into another branch. So a code change. It's not the actual change itself. The branch is the change itself. And then the merge request is where you collaborate on that change. And that's where I sort of see work items as generals as a place to collaborate. That facilitates views into actions, or maybe you can take actions within them, but it's a collaborative place to make decisions and then take actions as a result.
Yeah, if we were really going to like differentiate them, I would think like a MR would just be this really tiny thing where it's just like, all right, this is just the execution of our collaboration. I don't know if we want to get like that, especially at GitLab. It's not a very GitLab-y way of thinking, I think. What are you typing up, John?
Sorry, I was already responding to Jake's next point.
I need coffee, whatever. Go ahead, Jake.
Sure. Yeah, I was just saying, like, this is kind of along the lines of what Lee said. You know, we're building a really flexible system. Once we give customers these tools that are highly customizable, they will start using them to solve problems that they have in ways that we may not have foreseen. So it may be worthwhile, you know, upfront to consider if we do have strong opinions, or like opinions that we would encourage customers to abide by, then we should, you know, provide a document or something. But I do like where John's train of thought is going as well. So let him voice that.
If I could spell emergent, like, but anyway, yeah, like I agree. I'm just curious about what they might do that we haven't thought of, and what they might use it for, and whether like we'll see emergent behaviors and then like be able to adapt to those behaviors. Like we'll see a need if people go out of their way, as we do already, I guess, when people turn the application to a certain task or whatever, like test cases where we built them as an object because our own internal team were building out test reports using issues. Like there might be some interesting insights from this as well.
Let's just not turn it into Jira. That's my only concern.
Yes, not turning it into Jira. The big thing that I was actually talking with a large customer that we have about how modeling their Jira line in Jira and GitLab, and they talked about their abusive use of enforced workflows and how it's oppressive. And I think that's like where you don't want to go. I also think it's interesting when you give people a set of tools that are sort of flexible, and because then they're going to use the product the way you didn't design. But this also means there's an opportunity to create a better solution for the job to be done. So they could use this like generic sort of thing. When you start to see these patterns of how they use these generic kinds of things, then you can create a more custom solution. It's sort of like the approach we've taken with status and issue type, right? Because when you look at how people are using their labels and what they're searching for the most, at least on .com, they use labels for type and for status, right? So instead of using the label hammer, now we can create a better experience around that because it's emerged as like a consistent need that we want to productize. So I think it's interesting to give people the power to, because people are natural tinkerers too. I mean, everybody likes to tinker and create. So, but yes, not Jira, please, for the love.
Probably jump over to Alex now.
So it's more of an FYI about where we stand with the work items. I guess everyone is we're on the same page that we are moving forward with issues table used for all our work items. And I'm working tirelessly to combine everything into some sort of a developer documentation where we will document how this is going to be implemented with some general guidelines and stuff like that. So hopefully I'll have something ready this week for review and for merged in the documentation. There are still some open questions that I need to investigate, and I'll probably ping people on the team to ask for opinion or if they thought this through and stuff like that. List some of them there, but yeah, just as an update.
If there are no thoughts or questions about that, I'll pause just a moment in case there are. Otherwise, I'll move on to my point.
Yeah, I just had a point, Alex, on your second question there, like how should we define work item type hierarchies? The first work item type hierarchy we need is for epics or features, and they can have as a child another epic or an issue, right? Unless they're at the top of the hierarchy. No, sorry, unless they're on the bottom of the hierarchy, at the maximum depth of the hierarchy, and then they can just have an issue. So I'm wondering, like, can we build for that one use case and maybe like get away without having to answer every question ahead of time and design the whole system ahead of time? I think in some cases, even though we're trying to produce a blueprint, it's okay to say, we don't know how we'll do this yet. We'll return to it after the first iteration.
To me, I think designing it for any type is the same as designing it for one type, because you need to account for the fact that this type is going to change to a different type, right? So how do you react in that situation? Like you have, as you said, epic, feature, and then issue. What happens when the feature type changes to an issue or changes to an epic and stuff like that? What happens to the relationships? So you still need to account for that, which then fairly easily, I would say, expands to basically having it account for any type. So I don't know if we can design for a single one, but yeah, I'm welcome to details and suggestions and thinking it through. I've kind of had an idea of doing it with some PL SQL functionality, but we don't really want to do that from the database team perspective, as that code is kind of hard to maintain and test and all other things. So there probably needs to be a way to do it at the application level, I would think, or through some sort of a queries other than creating SQL functions. But yeah, that's something to be spend time on and investigate it and come up with some sort of a solution.
Cool, sounds good.
I just added a couple. I mean, I think it is outside of the scope for the first few iteration or MVCs, but to the extent it does impact how we design things. Just think of custom widgets. The first thing would just be custom fields, like I would think about. And Asana does a good job with this, where they let you have a custom field. Like if you create it on a project, you can move it or promote it to like the global field library for the workspace, right? So I would sort of think that like custom widgets would be able to be linked to or work on many different kinds of work item types. And then inheriting custom widgets, or think custom fields, or have like a shared custom widgets library at the top level namespace that things could live into. I think this is a whole like set of MVCs unto themselves. So I think for now, like focusing just on the widgets that we have that are predefined, but we will have to think about this for custom fields. So at least as a starting point. But I'm happy to comment and issue if you drop a link where you want to have these kind of conversations. They're good questions. Also, did you get a haircut, Alexander? You look different.
He may have lost audio.
Yeah, it looks like he did. But yes, he did get a haircut. Can answer that.
It's the beard, definitely.
Looks well trimmed.
I'll go ahead and just touch on mine for the sake of time. If you haven't already, please watch my Loom recording of my walkthrough with the prototypes. If you have any questions or comments, please let me know. I also forgot to add, and I'll add it right now, to the agenda that Donald was asking where we should collaborate on the design essentially for work items for the pieces that I've been working on specifically. And I looked through all of the issues. There were some that felt similar, but I didn't feel that there were any that specifically addressed the parts that I'm working on. So I went ahead and created another issue for this. And I'll put it here in the agenda. It does have all of the screens in it. And you're welcome to comment on those if you have any thoughts. The second question is one that I'm kind of still working through. It came about as a result of talking with Marcel this morning, and as well as Jeremy, and I spoke with Michael Lee yesterday. So Michael Lee's team is working on the editor, and I wanted to get him looped into what we were proposing in terms of changes to that. And then Jeremy, of course, is kind of our primary contact when it comes to accessibility and design patterns and things like that. So just getting them looped in. I and Jeremy have some concerns about accessibility, and we're going to meet later this afternoon just to kind of talk through some possibilities with those. I don't see any major changes to the design as a result of that, but one example is just ensuring that there's a consistent flow top to bottom in the DOM between mobile and desktop. So I might just be kind of moving around some of the elements from like top to middle of the page instead of the order that they're currently in. As far as the design patterns, some of the patterns we're proposing are new. They're not in pajamas. They would require the same amount, ideally, of conversation and vetting that we have for all of our other pajamas objects, but that takes a lot of time. So after talking with Marcel, his suggestion was that we, of course, evaluate how these new pieces work once we put them out internally and test them behind the feature flag, but also have a backup plan in the event that we need to revisit things. I can test with prototypes, but it's not going to be the same as people's daily interactions being interrupted with an entirely new layout. So I'm just curious if we've talked about, in the event that this is such a change, if there are any concerns with potentially having to do a rollback or having to make those adjustments to ensure the user experience is as good as it can be. And this does also require defining success and failure for these components. And I'm happy to take a stab at that, but would love feedback on that as well if anyone has thoughts. My thought is that if we keep everything small, and we continue to iterate, then we can continue to also improve things iteratively. But just curious if anybody has thoughts on that.
Mine is just iterate on the UI UX quickly with front end engineers, right? Like,
outside of prototypes though, right? Like once it's actually built, we're testing.
Yeah, so like if we get feedback that something's not great, like we want to take it and iterate on it. So like I feel like we're going to have enough front end engineers focused on this that like we can split up different pieces and people can own different things. But I think the goal is to build it together and have as short of feedback loops as possible, right? Amongst you, front end, back end, people testing it, so that like you can iterate to solve and iron out those kinks. And then also just say, like, I think the ultimate path to general availability will be very risk averse. Like I hope we're able to figure out how to solve for allowing people to opt into the new view or opt back out, because we're not technically adding new data necessarily beyond like parenting and issues. That being able to kind of switch between the two would be nice if at all possible. That way, like we can have a blog post about it. We can have like several upcoming like release posts, items talking about the new view. And that way we can slowly start to get people adopting it over time before we make it like the default.
Well, my number one concern is accessibility over any of the other usability opportunities that we have. So I am looking at ways to ensure that we are compliant with that and that it is still a good experience for folks who might be using things like screen readers. And I'll keep you all up to date with any changes that result from that. But I also am still working on annotating the GitLab UI elements, and I'll keep you all also in the loop on that progress. But is there anything else that's needed for me to ensure that I'm not blocking the engineers at this point from being able to get started on their pieces?
Before we hop over to Chris and Brett, did you want to vocalize something? You started typing and then you deleted it. So I want to make sure that you have.
I thought it was an interesting point too, so I hated to see it get deleted.
Yes, sorry. I was thinking that we could have a special branch where a lot of different MRs can come in. That's not part of master, but we can all work together and iterate quickly on ideas and stuff like that. Because it always slows me down trying to get everything ready to go into master. So that's just an idea.
You mean like in kind of an integration branch to see things more than one piece at a time?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Up to the engineers. I don't, how you
It's
want
a
to.
great idea.
Yeah, ship the code. I'm all about it. If we do that, the
Yeah.
review app would be nice.
Yeah.
Using that.
I guess there's the question of like how to reconcile that with like the value of iteration and like and shipping small things. But like if we can't, you know, ship a piece of user value, like I don't get the sense that that kind of integration branch would be so large that it wouldn't still be like an MVC worth of scope. You know, we wouldn't be building the whole feature set in a separate branch from master.
And we could still end up splitting it off into smaller MRs that go into master, is also kind of what I was thinking. But it's
Yeah,
nice being
that
able
makes
to
sense.
have the whole thing up and running and seeing how it's going and stuff. At least for me, I'm kind of visual.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Mine kind of builds on that too. Some of the interactions, like whether you have a pin title or things like that, once we get them into the UI, will be a lot more. I mean, everyone's discussing this right now, but we'll be able to actually see how the different elements interact. So I'm game for having some kind of branch or way to view them all together and iterate fast. I wanted to ask if we could also have the snapshots, so the screenshots put up into designs on some of these issues. Holly, I'm wondering if you've thought about doing that just so we could have discussions on the geography of some of the parts as we get into weighting.
I was reviewing Gabe and Donald's comments and I missed the first part of your question. I apologize. Was it including screenshots in the issues or something else?
Yeah, so once the engineers start weighting, like I know we have a Loom and there's other assets out there, but it would be great if we could have screenshots of the actual UI go up as designed so conversations could happen on it, and iterations as the conversation happens, you upload the next version of that screen based on what you just heard.
I've got that in the issue that I posted in the agenda, but it is in the form of, so I used the Figma integration. And so it's pulling in the frames.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Would it be preferable? I was thinking about this morning because I would imagine those will update when I change the frame in Figma. So would it be preferable to have like snapshot screenshots that aren't changing?
No, I think this is okay. Actually, sorry, I hadn't seen it. I didn't
no, it's
click.
New.
I didn't scroll down.
It's new. It's no problem. I just finished adding everything yesterday, so it's still pretty new. But yeah, that. Let me know if there's a preferred way to do it as opposed to this, and I'm happy to, you know, make any adjustments.
No, this looks really good. And yeah, over time, if some of these get deleted or there's like a new way to do it, we'll just kind of use that as the SSOT. This works well.
Donald, do you want to, or maybe Kristen is responding.
I'm just saying thank you.
Donald, do you want to verbalize your question or do you want me just to respond?
Yeah, I can verbalize it. So what is the, like when we're changing components within work items, like a GitLab UI component at its core, we're changing the design. What would be the ideal path then? We release work items, and we get the thumb, like users like it. Are we then going to go into GitLab UI and make the changes so that it's like that's the new pattern, or what's kind of your ideal approach toward these redesigns?
I'd like to also hear if Alexis has any thoughts on this, but there's the ideal path that I have just as a designer, and then there's the ideal path that I would have to have in order for us to make some progress quickly. And so I'll focus on that one. My thought is that we need to have it in GitLab UI as soon as possible, but of course it needs to be finalized, at least to the point where we're ready to launch it. So I guess the question is, when do we want to consider it done? And at that point, I would feel that it would make sense to have it in GitLab UI. I also fully admit that I don't thoroughly understand the relationship between GitLab UI and what we actually see in the product from a programmatic standpoint. Like if we're testing something in GitLab UI, is it also surfaced in the product where we can be getting feedback on it from live users? Or is that sort of like a staging environment where we are seeing the changes and we can view and respond and comment and play with those things, but it's not actually in the production environment yet?
Both. So it's versioned separately. So if we made a change to GitLab UI and then we bumped it up even just a minor version, GitLab would then pull in the updates during the next round of updates, which happen pretty frequently.
Okay. So then in that case, I would again say that it needs to be dependent upon what we determine to be done. And I would imagine that that would be me, and in which case, what I would consider to be done would be validated with users and at least maybe not even signed off on per se by some of the other parties that would be affected by the decision, but at least they're aware of it. And that's what I've been trying to do for the past week to 2 weeks, is pull in Pedro and Jeremy and Michael Lee and various other people that could be affected by inline editing and the assignees module and things like that. So I am trying to already get that ball rolling and have as few kind of last minute gotchas as possible. I don't anticipate too much of that as long as we are keeping our changes small. But even today, when I meet with Jeremy, we met this morning and he wanted to have a second meeting because he has so many questions about padding and alignment and colors and typography and things like that that are slightly different from what we currently have in the product. The quick and easy way to do it is to just use as many of the existing patterns that we have, but obviously if we're redesigning things anyway and rebuilding things anyway, there's opportunity to improve those, and that's what we're trying to do. So does that answer the question though? I mean, it really, in my opinion, it comes down to when it's considered done enough, not done forever, but done enough to put it into the product, and then it should be in sync, I would say, with GitLab UI and vice versa.
Yeah, it does. I wonder if we can also, solve for the prototyping iteration side of things too. Like if we hope to make some of these changes to the patterns within GitLab UI, if we go ahead and make those changes now, and then they're applied everywhere that uses those components within GitLab, then we can get feedback from those other teams' usages of them. And then if we hear that, hey, this doesn't work, then we go ahead and revert. So it's like a smaller iteration as opposed to rebuilding these components just for work items right now, waiting to get feedback in work items, and then determining how we're going to change the GitLab UI component after the fact. You know, does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'm curious about the word revert because we are creating brand new things. So what is your understanding of reverting in that case?
So I mean, if it's a brand new thing, like we would eventually create a new GitLab UI component for it, then there is no revert there. It's just tweaking. But I'm thinking more of a component like drop downs, where we want to approach it differently within work items. Do we tweak our current GitLab UI dropdown component, or do we start from new and then after we decide that that's the new pattern we want to follow, then we change it in GitLab UI?
That is a good question. It was my understanding that because we were rewriting the code for all of these things anyway, that they would all be some form of new, but I guess there are cases where we could be pulling in maybe parts, like to your point, a dropdown might exist inside of the assignees module. And so would we be using the existing dropdown for the new assignees module? Is that kind of an example?
Yes, exactly.
In that case, I want to try to keep as many of the existing components in the design as possible while still improving the usability so that we have as few risks involved as we can. In that case, I would say we use the dropdown that exists and then determine if there are any opportunities with the new proposed design changes rather than starting with everything new. Any thoughts on that from an engineering standpoint? Does that add or remove complexity in any way?
No, that's helpful. And I think that's the mindset we should take as we're designing these. And I think that that'd be helpful if we had that annotated too. So as you're annotating the other parts like the padding and stuff on the designs, just go in and say, okay, this dropdown is using the GitLab UI dropdown component.
Cool. That's what I'm doing. And
Cool.
I'm also going to create a separate issue after talking with Jeremy today that will outline all of the new proposed pieces and tag foundations and get those folks involved with all of my proposed changes in one place. So I'll tag you all in that too, just in case you're interested in following that conversation.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea, Holly, because I think like to your point, Donald, any changes that are to, foundational components like a dropdown, for example, we could validate that through that flow, like that ideal component lifecycle, and validate that at a design level and even just do like quick prototypes there that we don't have to build out necessarily. And then we apply those changes within GitLab UI to use. But I don't think we need to get there yet. Does that make sense?
Agree.
Cool. We are at time, a little late. Thanks everyone for staying. Yeah, have a great week. Talk to you later.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
See y'all.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.